So I want to talk about a couple things. First thing is the name of this presentation. I'm going to back it up. I used to teach this presentation as teaching your quarterbacks to read coverages. And then in some of my experience as a younger coach, there were times where I thought I had taught a quarterback how to read coverages, and then there was some bumps in the road, and quarterbacks got out on the field, and they demonstrated to me that they didn't know coverages. And I like to think that, you know, I'm a decent football coach, and so I didn't want to blame the quarterbacks for that. So I kind of reevaluated. This is going back a decade or more. Reevaluated the way that I teach coverages instead of making it just a strictly academic thing where I just try to impart what I know about coverage directly to the quarterback. Sometimes it's not that simple, and quarterbacks are all built kind of different. So I changed my philosophy to making the quarterback comfortable, giving him confidence in the way that he approaches reading coverages, and therefore this presentation has kind of evolved over time. So I hope you enjoy it and talk a little bit about what we're going to cover. First, we're going to identify a purpose. Why are we here? Why are we taking time in April to go over teaching our quarterbacks coverages? Next is the teaching strategy, and this is really important for me. What's kind of our, with the blank canvas or blank whiteboard, what's our strategy? How are we going to try and approach this? And then specifically, what methods are we going to use to teach our quarterbacks? Our desired outcome for sure is something that I think anytime you approach anything as a teacher or as a coach, you have to have a good idea about what your desired outcome is. So we will cover that as well here tonight. So first, our purpose. There's a few things that I always want my quarterbacks to be able to do. And the first is to recognize what it is that they're looking at. And that's really pretty simple. That's about as straightforward rote memorization or just base recognition as you can get. As a football coach, we all do it. We engage in repetitive activities so that we know that our athletes are seeing what we expect them to see, and they're able to identify it. The next step for us as a quarterback, obviously, it's one thing to be able to identify, well, yeah, we got too high, that's what we're looking at, but to have an understanding of kind of how what the inner workings are of what they're looking at across the line of scrimmage on the other side of the ball. Want them to not only recognize, but be able to understand, and then as a result of that, to be able to attack. Based on what they know about particular fronts or particular coverages, that they be able to attack based on that recognition, that understanding kind of comes together so that you have a quarterback who's relaxed, he's comfortable, and he's set to pull the trigger after making good decisions. Those are our three basic things that we want to teach. So when we talk strategy, for me there always has to be a plan, and maybe it's just because I'm not smart enough, but I can't really go on the fly. I feel like I need to really teach in sequence, at least at the very beginning of my experience with a team and with quarterbacks. So it's important to me that I always teach in sequence. Naturally, there'll be from year to year, if you're doing your job as a football coach, there are going to be things that you tweak. There are always going to be things that you add. But still, the concept of the sequence, that we hang on to that, I think is a really important thing, and that we don't deviate from making sure that we always lay out our plan, whether it's at the beginning of the year or every couple of years, we reevaluate and make sure that we approach teaching our quarterbacks in a sequence format. The next is the checklist concept, and we're going to see that a couple of times tonight during the presentation. I tend to always work with things laid out in checklist format. It's going to seem a little bit probably cumbersome at first when we first talk about it, but my experience has always been that once the quarterbacks start to see it, our athletes start to see it in action, that the checklists fade away pretty quickly, and it's all really just about one giant task of recognition. But the checklist in the beginning, really important as we impart some of these concepts to our quarterbacks. We're going to try and get our quarterbacks to that confident point, to that relaxed and comfortable point, with 4 types of tools. The first we talked about, recognition and familiarity. Those are the really basic things. Then we talk about physical techniques, making sure that our quarterback, if they have the ability to recognize coverage, for example, but their physical approach and their mechanics are so poor that oftentimes the decision-making is almost a moot point because they can't deliver the ball either on time or accurately. So we want to focus on physical techniques. The next is technology. There's a lot of tools out there that we can use, and I'd like to share some of my ideas about what it is that I use in terms of technology that I think helps me as a coach and also our players. And then finally is coaching feedback. What are we giving to our quarterbacks on a consistent basis to get them better? Okay, so when we start with recognition and familiarity, I always think of this as kind of our alphabet. I like to say when I'm on the road doing Glazier clinics that my daughter now is in 4th grade. She's my middle child, and right now she's going through learning a lot of multiplication, a lot of division, and then even a little bit of algebra in her 4th grade class when they go to math period. And the reason I bring that up is because when she has trouble, it's typically because she doesn't remember all of the tables that she was assigned to study. So if you don't know what, for example, 4 times 9 is, it's difficult to make that next step in the sequence. You could really use any type of analogy when it comes to learning. You're going to have a difficult time learning to read if you don't have the alphabet memorized. So recognition and familiarity is always where we start. And we start with coverage hints. There's going to be a few factors that contribute to coverage hints. The first are defenders, those folks that we care about on the other side of the line of scrimmage, followed by their leverage. Where are they lined up? We talk about things like depth and width, those sorts of things on the field. And then finally, weaknesses and strengths that each of the coverages kind of brings to the table. Those ones are typically pretty easy to teach, and they're pretty easily identifiable. And if we start early enough and we do it at the right time of year, those are things that I find can usually be imparted to our quarterbacks pretty well. And then finally, we talked earlier about the checklist concept. There's a pre-snap checklist that I have all my quarterbacks when they first start to learn about coverages go through. So talk a little bit about that. So what does the pre-snap checklist look like? Well, the first thing is when we break the huddle, I've experienced a lot of quarterbacks, both in my my jobs as a high school coach over the years, and then obviously with Complete QB. I see a lot of quarterbacks when they break the huddle tend to just let their eyes drop to the ground, and I find a lot of I don't know if it's the age, the awkwardness of teenage quarterbacks, or if it's just a bad habit that people get when they don't have confidence. But eyes down is one of the worst things that we can do. So we always want to make sure that our eyes as we break the huddle are up, able to see what's in front of us. The second thing we want to do is be able to find the safeties and do a quick count. I always like to tell our quarterbacks that you're not going to find a whole lot of deviation. There's either going to be 2 safeties, there's going to be 1 safety, or there's going to be no safeties as you approach the line of scrimmage. The next is that we go get our eyes to one side of the field or the other, to a cornerback. I don't much care where my quarterbacks start. I think most of the time my quarterbacks wind up doing it the way I do it, which is I work left to right across the screen. But it is important, I think, that they get in the habit of doing it the same way every time, so they develop that routine as they go through the checklist. So we'll scan the field. I'll say from left to right. We want to be able to see, and the way that I'll scan is I'll look cornerback to one side, scan across at linebacker level, see the opposite corner, see the safeties in the defensive front, and then finally check our own people. And that's something I always like to add at the end. I think it's important that we don't forget that. I've seen quarterbacks go on the center and then realize that their fullback was offset the wrong way, or the H-back, or their tight end was lined up to the wrong side, and then they pull out to try to redirect that person, and they wind up getting an illegal motion penalty, whether it's right or it's wrong, getting called on them when they pull out from under center. So that's something we also want to do. Check our own people, make sure we're aligned the way that we need them. And then we got to ask some key questions. What are the key questions? Well, this is how we're going to ID coverage. First thing we say, we talked about this already, how many safeties do we have? And then finally, for our cornerbacks, what's the depth of the cornerback? How far off the line of scrimmage is he? What's his leverage? Is he outside leverage? Is he head up? Is he inside? And finally, where are his eyes? And that's the biggest thing. I think we start to read the intentions of our cornerback when we look to see who they care about. They care about me and what's going on in the backfield as the quarterback, or do they care about what's happening out there on, let's say, that number 1 receiver that they're aligned over? And then finally, the question that kind of trumps all questions is, how many deep defenders? That's probably our best cheat hint that we can give to a high school quarterback especially. How many deep defenders? It really kind of gives us a window into exactly what we're looking at across the line of scrimmage. We're going to teach 6 base coverages. We're going to go through them pretty quickly here in terms of diagrams. As I said, if you want this slide deck, all you have to do is communicate with me, and I'll make sure that you get it. But the 6 base coverages are going to be drawn up here as we make our way through. So we're going to start with our 2 safety looks. So as you can see, you'll forgive my less than artistic flair that I have, but this is probably my best pass at drawing up an offensive formation and a defensive front. You'll see that I've identified the safeties up top in green. We got a free safety and a rover or a strong safety. You'll see that kind of throughout these 6 diagrams of the different coverages. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll identify up top how many safeties. I like to call it up on the shelf. And we see that we have 2 safeties there, and we go through our process, our routine. Eyes go to the corner. We immediately, identify, okay, he's about 5 yards up the line of scrimmage. He's outside leverage. I'll tell you in this 2-dimensional drawing that the cornerback's eyes are into the backfield. So I look across linebackers, confirm the same thing with the corner on the other side, and I'm able to identify pretty quickly that we have 2 high with all pretty much zone defenders underneath. So the first coverage that we teach our kids is cover 2. And then we quickly move our conversation to, and we walk through this on the field with our quarterbacks. We try to accomplish this very, very early on. For states where it's legal and you have the ability to get to your quarterbacks this time of year, through the spring and into the early summer, I recommend that on the board and then reinforced either in the gym or on the field. This is a really helpful time or really helpful exercise to go through early on in the off season or the preseason to get your quarterbacks familiarized. This is not something we have a whole lot of time typically for once we get to fall camp. So we'll identify weaknesses. And in cover 2, we'll always talk about one of our initial things that we'll look at is always there being an area in the middle of the field that has an open area in between the safeties there in the middle of the field, and then obviously between the safety and the corner on one side and the safety and corner on the other side. Those are 2 things that those are 3 areas that we always want to try to attack in cover 2. As we look to our next slide, bear with me just a second, coaches. Okay. Sorry about that, coach. I lost you for a second with the Scott, if you're on the line with us, I'm clicking back from the drawing tool back to the
if you'll go back to your webinar control
panel.
Coach,
I just got it, Coach. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. Okay.
Yep.
Okay, so our second look at coverage here. Our second look at coverage here, folks, and again, I apologize, coaches. Our next 2 safety look that we're going to look at is cover 4 for us. When we talk about cover 4, it's important to distinguish between cover 4, where a team is probably aggressively trying to get a safety down into the box based on what he reads from number 2. This is a really basic look at cover 4, and this would be the prevent version of cover 4, 4 deep quarters being covered. So we'll ask our quarterbacks to identify that by looking at the safeties first. He sees that he's got 2 high. His eyes move to the corner, and he can see right away as he looks at the corners that he's really got a deep corner. That's what we tell our quarterbacks. That trumps everything. When you see multiple deep defenders like that, not just the safeties but also the corners, you can stop for a moment and kind of pause on everything else that you're doing in that checklist and say, okay, how many deep defenders do I have? As the quarterback quickly scans the field, he's going to realize that he has 4 deep defenders across. So we'll immediately be able to, in our offense, the way we'll call it Black 44, we'll make some sort of ID call that changes from year to year where all of our players know that we are now looking at a kind of a prevent deep quarters 4 coverage there, okay? Now, obviously, we want to be able to have our quarterbacks, as they make a progression, as they learn coverages, to understand, how and why and when would a team choose to do this. And we always ask the question, is this something that we see every down? And the answer is obviously no, because we have 4 deep defenders. I always like to say it's a good way to get fired as a defensive coordinator if you're going to play 4 across that deep on every down. So obviously the areas that are strong from this defense are 4 vertical defenders. So they chop up those 53-plus yards across the football field pretty easily when it's split among 4 defenders. They're obviously now got some deficiency here along the lower shelf. There's only 3 defenders at the linebacker level in a typical defensive alignment to cover that whole 53-plus yard width of the field. So we tell our quarterbacks right away that this is something we expect to see situationally. In the situation we expect probably end of the half, end of the game, where a defense is just interested in keeping your front, maybe 3rd and 35 after some penalties, that type of deal. So that's our second 2 safety look, our cover 4, a deep 4 as we call it. The third and final 2 safety look that we're going to look at still incorporates those 2 high safeties. My quarterback breaks the huddle. He looks up top, and he sees those 2 guys over the top. His eyes, for his checklist, are immediately going to go to the corner. He sees at the corner now something's changed, because that corner is screwed down to the line of scrimmage as close to number 1 typically as he can get, and he's got inside leverage. I'll tell you again, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt in this drawing. The quarterback is looking at and cares about that number one receiver to both sides of the ball. So that's an immediate cue for our quarterback to say, okay, I definitely have some type of man coverage that's going here. I have a backer who's even walked up a little bit and walked out for the number two receiver, the slot to the right of our screen. Yet I still have those two safeties up top. So it's the next coverage that we teach, and we call this cover 5. And I call it cover 5 because of the 5 available potential man defenders underneath, the 2 corners and the 3 backers is represented by the letter B. But again, we still have that safety net over the top of the 2 safeties up top. And so that's an important concept for us to identify, because this is where we start to teach our quarterbacks about it's not straight zone and it's not straight man. It's what we call a combo coverage. We've got safeties over the top and obviously a zone look, but all these other guys underneath potentially in a man look. And we'll get a little bit more closely into those combo looks shortly. Okay. So now we look and see that the next thing we have, we'll move to our one safety look. So we break the huddle now. We've identified that we have a single safety over the top in the middle of the field playing center field, at least on paper here. We then get our eyes to the corner. We see that the corner now has head up or outside leverage and with some depth. He's probably 8 or 9 yards deep. Not quite as deep as a safety, but still clearly a deep defender. I scan the field. We look at linebacker level, and we see that we have 4 linebackers or maybe 3 and a safety acting as a linebacker. And then a corner who's also 8 or 9 yards deep. So this is where we begin to identify, okay, how many deep defenders? That question becomes important. And our quarterback realizes there are 3 across. And obviously his own look, we identify it there as cover 3. The way that we like to teach the weaknesses of cover 3, and typically the way that we'll teach weaknesses among all coverages is that we'll release 4 vertical, just kind of a walkthrough or a jog through for our quarterbacks. Once we get bodies moving a little bit to kind of test out what the weaknesses and strengths of these coverages are, we'll get our 4 vertical concept to identify that. So you see here that obviously if 4 vert, including the tight end, were released now, we're going to see that we're potentially got a weakness to a seam. As long as our number 2 receivers, our slot to the right and our tight end to the left, are good at getting a release, we see that we can really stress a safety who's in the middle of the field as we climb. Typically, our number 1s out there are not such a good option for us against cover 3 because you already have a soft corner who's backpedaling trying to keep everything in front of him. At least if we were to talk about a vertical release, maybe not such a great option. So our weaknesses are 2 of them that are obvious, and that's between the safety and the corner to one side and between the safety and the corner to the other side. We'll also talk about pre-snap alignment in terms of determining which flat is weak as well. So a lot of that's going to depend on our linebacker alignment. So our first one safety look there, cover 3. Next, our next single safety look, again, we've broken the huddle. Now we identify what do we have up top. Single safety on the shelf. Eyes slide to the corner. What does he tell us? Well, now he's giving us a look like we saw a couple coverages ago. He's screwed down, inside leverage, and here he's got his eyes on number 1. Same with that rover or outside backer who's on the slot to the right and also our corner to the right as well. So we see that we've clearly got some man concept going on here down around the line of scrimmage, but we still have that man up top over all the action, playing center field at least for now. He's likely in real life in this cover 1 look probably to cheat to the wide side of the field or cheat to the dominant athlete on offense. Something like that is what we expect to see. But again, this is another example of a combo coverage, not a straight zone, but a combo coverage. And we ask our quarterbacks, typically when we get into the cover 1, we start to ask them what is typically capable of happening. What are defenses, what's their motivation for playing a combo coverage or a straight man coverage? And usually it might be a kid in the group who's played some Madden and understands the concept. It might be a kid who's just sharp and has heard his coaches talk. But they'll say, well, they want to add pressure, coach. They want to blitz. And that's exactly what we want our quarterbacks to start to think about. So we see that down around the line of scrimmage, we've got a total of 6 skilled defenders to cover what are probably 4 immediate vertical threats. So it only takes 4 guys to cover those 4 immediate vertical threats, but you got 6 defenders who are skill type guys. So obviously that frees up 2 bodies to twist and to do some stunt action along with the defensive front and bring pressure. So one of the things we always want to emphasize, again, with combo or straight man coverages, is the concept of pressure. Okay. So our last coverage, our 6th and final coverage that we teach our quarterbacks is obviously we break the huddle. We look up top to see how many safeties are on the shelf. In this case, there are none. So it's our cover 0. This is straight man coverage. And this is a good time for us to introduce to our kids the concept of not only is it not even a combo coverage anymore, it's a straight man coverage, But it's a really good time, and I usually get a laugh out of the kids when I tell them it's Madden time at this point, because we got a whole bunch of bodies at or near the line of scrimmage that can make our day tough. And I think especially for me teaching at the high school level mostly, I think one of the things that's important to remember here is that I think oftentimes when guys run cover zero, I don't know if it's always, defensive coordinators that I've gone against over the years, I don't know if it's always to be 100% sound and say we've got a really good person-to-person matchup on each of these coverage responsibilities with these offensive players they can release downfield. But I think it's more about trying to disrupt and make a high school quarterback nervous. I think at all levels of football, it's about making a quarterback, forcing them into a bad decision. So I really like to spend some time with our quarterbacks talking about, the combo coverage and especially straight man coverage, so they have kind of a feel and a familiarity and a comfort level. I also like to introduce the coaches at this point to just take a step back and ask yourself, if you feel, if you ask your quarterbacks today, what is our out, or what is our option or our options, plural, when we see combo coverages or straight man coverages? If you feel comfortable in giving your quarterbacks the ability to do something other than the call timeout, what exactly is the out that you've given your quarterback? And it could be something really simple. It could be just picking our best matchup out on our number ones. Which one of these cornerbacks do you want to pick on, depending on our matchups? If you want to run some sort of mesh concept in which, say, the tight end to the left and the slot to the right were to run crossing routes, where the man on the line of scrimmage, the tight end on the left, moving left to right, goes a yard or two higher across the line of scrimmage than that slot who's coming back across underneath, usually a pretty good man coverage beater. It could be something as simple as a back or a slot check down. Whatever your solution is, and I'm always happy to talk offline with coaches about the way that you attack man coverage. Whatever that is, I think it's important that our quarterbacks know that. Because a way for a quarterback, I think, to make some big steps backward and probably to regress as a quarterback is to have a couple bad experiences with combo or straight man coverages and make a poor decision and therefore start to chip away at some of their confidence because, they just didn't execute in a tough spot. So those are the 6 coverages that we look through. The next concept that we introduce always for our quarterbacks is it's a key one here, and that's testing. I'm a big believer in testing. There's a few areas that we test along. The first is formations and plays. I always like to know from my quarterbacks that they, at a base level, know how we're supposed to line up and how all of our folks on offense, how they're supposed to react. I know it's obviously you have to baby step depending on the age, the maturity, and the intelligence and the football savvy of your quarterback. But I would like, in a perfect world, for my quarterbacks to all understand where all 11 are, at least in a general sense, in terms of where they have to go and what their responsibilities are. The second thing that we test on is defensive alignment. We want our quarterbacks to know, typically, even if they don't know names and numbers yet, or they never progress to that level, the fact that they know defensive alignment, where they line up, the team that we're playing this week, when they line up in a 4-4, where are they? When they're in a 3-4, what do? Do they shade the nose, the head up, those sorts of things? That's what we care about. And then finally, and this is kind of I think a judgment call by every coach, is do you have the type of kid or kids playing the quarterback position that they are far enough along that they can look at film, and if they're conscientious enough and interested enough in watching film, to identify what guys line up where. If they can tell you that, number 54 is a dude, and he's a tough guy for us to deal with, especially when he walked up to the line of scrimmage and he's not at his normal, Sam or Will linebacker spot, just as an example. Personnel, being able to test for personnel is really a bonus and a luxury. I've had quarterbacks over the years that I could easily test them on personnel, and other guys who they couldn't take it that far, and that was okay, and they still had some success for us. Here's a test example. This is one of the documents that I talked about, coaches. If you want a copy of this, just feel free to email me, and I'll make sure I get it to you. It's a simple Excel document. I always like to say at the clinics, you take it, it's fully editable. You put your logo and your name up the top, and you tell everybody that you came up with it. And it's a great tool for your kids. It's an easy way for me. I do actually do this across all offensive positions, obviously focused today on working with our quarterbacks today and talking about our quarterbacks. But I typically give either a 6 or a 12-question test. This particular test that you're looking at now is a preseason test just on formations, and again, it's pretty quick and easy. I typically give, for every 6 questions, I'll give 5 minutes, and that's usually more than enough time for our quarterbacks to to answer the questions that are thrown their way. Okay. So how do I test and when do I test? Well, we have a mixture of games. Sometimes we play on Friday night, sometimes we play on Saturday afternoon, sometimes even Saturday night in the Northeast. In Jersey City, where I coach at Hudson Catholic High School, we have a shared facility, so sometimes our schedule can get a little bit crazy around game day. So I'm going to assume that we're looking at a Friday night game day because I think that's most of the high school guys that are on have that, and then some of our, obviously our college guys and our youth guys have some weekend schedules, but you obviously can adjust. Monday for me is always about formations, typically because we're still probably in the last stages of cooking up what it is that we want to do offensively, so we don't go too crazy with testing them on what we have planned for the week. We tend to work on formations on Monday. On Tuesday is where we start to introduce the concept of plays. Our guys have now seen it, not only in a walkthrough and on the board, but they've hopefully had a chance to run through it a little bit on the field. So we're comfortable with getting them back to school. Typically after practice is where I'll quiz on Tuesday on plays. On Wednesday is where I'll get into opponent base fronts to make sure that our quarterback has a pretty good feel for what we're looking at in terms of coverages and defensive front. And then Thursday, we'll get into the personnel if we ever get there at all, depending on the year and, as we said before, the maturity level of the quarterback. That's my sample schedule and how I work through the week. And again, when you email me, if you ask for some greater level of detail on the testing documents, I'm happy to give it to you depending on what piece of this testing you're most interested in. The next thing that we like to do when it comes to recognition and familiarity is play some games. And what does that mean? Well, first one is decision man. Decision man is we're going to identify a defender. We want our quarterbacks in controlled environments to get really good at executing based on what they see from defensive pre-snap alignment and then post-snap movement from a defender. So decision man is one of the games that we like to play. And this is a good one I like because it's a pretty low overhead. It doesn't take a whole lot of time. You can run multiple quarterbacks at the same time. So you can see at the bottom of the screen, the two blue circles are two quarterbacks. You can see to each side. We're running the basic curl flat concept. The decision man is circled here with a red circle. Okay, so we see that they've got inside leverage. We've seen that we've got what is probably a cover 3 type look. So we want to be able to see now, as a coach, I'll probably tell our linebackers to either drop and try to bracket and get underneath that curl or fly out and cover that flat, that shoot route, that speed out as quickly as they can. The reason that we'll do this, guys, again, this is to give some comfort and some familiarity to our quarterbacks so they just get really good at executing on really base concepts. This is a great way to build confidence, in my opinion. The next game that we like to play, we call this coverage shift, and this is a fun one to do in August. I find this especially helpful when we have guys that are, if we're running the kids particularly hard or it's just a really hard-working group and the legs are a little bit dead and they're a little bit tired. Coverage shift can be a good one because it can reinforce what your defense is doing while also giving your quarterbacks, your wideouts, and your skill guys an opportunity to see coverages and kind of react to them on the fly. So the way that we run the coverage shift drill is we typically won't have, I've drawn in all the defensive front and the offensive interior guys. I typically won't have them around. I'll just have eligible receivers and quarterbacks and then linebackers and defensive secondary people on the field for this. But the way coverage shift will work is I'll have a quarterback, instead of facing the line of scrimmage, he'll be facing me. I'm facing the line of scrimmage, say 5 or 7 yards off the ball. And the quarterback will look at me. And then behind, I'll reach just beyond the quarterback so that he can't see what I'm doing. And I'll hold up fingers, for example. And I'll tell my guys, start out in this, and I'll hold up 2 fingers. And then I'll say, and then on my call, shift to this. And in this example, I'm asking them to shift from cover 2 to cover 3. So I have my quarterback come over the ball and pretty easily go through that checklist that we talked about earlier. Check the safeties. Got 2 up high. Corners, what do they look like? I'll quickly ascertain that this is cover 2. So I'll call out black 22, at which point I'll call for my guys to shift on defense, shift. You can even have the defensive coordinator do it with us if it's easy for them to get done. So then we quickly shift, and we see some bodies move. And now we see that this is all pre-snap. And now our quarterback is responsible for calling out a check and identifying what coverage he's now seeing. And I didn't really pull the string with the linebackers. I probably could have moved those linebackers over to our left a little bit. And again, this just gives the quarterback in a controlled environment with immediate feedback and immediate, kind of being put on the spot to make sure that he's prepared, gives us a chance to show him some coverage shift examples. So again, the correct call here would have been starting out in black 22 and then check, black 33 as we shift to a new kind of coverage. The next game we like to play is called Find the Blitz. Pretty self-explanatory. I like to have our quarterback over the ball and give him one or two examples of guys who are clearly out of position. They're doing something different than what they do in their base alignment. And again, this is a very controlled environment and an easy way for us to identify who's coming to give us pressure and who's vacating an area. So I'll give them a variety of looks to this. As you see to the left, I've just got a now route or a quick slant to the inside to the vacated area for a potential blitzer from the left, and I've got a choice route from a slot receiver over to the right, again, based on a defender that we typically expect to be at linebacker level who's now walked up. So again, this is a good controlled environment drill for our quarterbacks to be able to recognize who is walked up and who means to do them harm. The next game we'll look at is pick a matchup. This is important because one of the things that I like to emphasize all the time, I think at every level of football, we always find matchups that are either positive or negative for us as offensive coaches. And when we can exploit, especially at the high school level, very rare is the high school team that I see that has 22 capable and competent football players that I don't identify any matchup weaknesses in them. Most of the teams that I play up in the Northeast in Jersey City at Hudson Catholic, I will typically see, very, very rarely will I encounter a true two-platoon team. Almost everybody has at least some of their key guys, their best athletes, playing on both sides of the football. And I know in other regions of the country that's not always the case. But even when it is a two-platoon team, there are still, finding a high school football team that has 22 guys that are all capable and, grayed out as A-type players, it is tough to find. So we always want to try to identify that guy who's a weakness. So we can do this a couple different ways. We can just let them go based on the athletes that they know from their own team and let them just have some fun, just getting good at evaluating people. We can also do it with colored pennies, and, especially if it's an upcoming opponent, either try to pick on somebody that you've identified or try to avoid somebody that you've identified as well. So this is pick a matchup. And again, low overhead, can really move it quick with multiple quarterbacks and multiple wideouts and defenders. Next thing we like to talk about when it comes to recognition and familiarity is angles and placement. Two things we have to be conscious of. Knowing the leverage based on the route, we got to throw the ball in the right spot. Is the defender chasing from an inside leverage position? Is he over the top and reacting up? Is he an outside in leverage? That's going to all dictate where we place the football. So one of the things that we like to do is draw it up for our kids, and then see that they execute it on the field. So I've got, similar to what I had out before when we did the coverage man, the decision man drill, I've got the same thing drawn up in front of you now, just so that we put an emphasis. Usually we'll take a minute or two at different periods during the preseason and just ask if our quarterbacks work on nothing but leverage. Think of nothing but leverage on these different routes. And sometimes we'll even do it on, we'll do it with just a single defender to each side, just so that our quarterbacks are conscious where to place the football. So you see the red circle is obviously a bad place to throw a speed out here. In this case, speed out is our example because it's playing to the strength of a pursuing defender who's coming from inside out to try to jump that flat route, in this case with the cover, the cover three corners and the outside backers who are trying to fly to the flat. The green circle, obviously, represents a good place for us to throw it out toward the end of the extended route from the number two receiver to each side to a place to put it. So again, ball placement is really critical for us. I'm going to get into a couple concepts and drills that I think help on the physical side. And again, we said physical techniques are important to us because you can have all the academic ability and the football IQ ability in the world, but if you can't execute in a physical way with mechanics, I know I'm stating the obvious, but we're going to have a lot of trouble having any kind of success despite everything we've learned about coverage. So I'm going to highlight a few drills. I'm not going to go over every drill that I have here, but any drills that you see come up on the screen, or if I share with you, if you ask for a copy of the presentation, I will certainly get it to you, or I can go into greater detail for you. So if you see something bolded, it means we're going to talk a little bit about it. So the first one is points alignment, where we catch and adjust. So let's take a look at that one, okay? We see we got a picture here, and I always like to ask our quarterbacks, before we deliver the football, except under the most extreme examples of duress, where we just, we got people hanging on us or coming for us, and obviously sometimes at least 30% of the time, or 20% of the time anyway, in my experience, we're going to have to throw a football without perfect mechanics, and I get that and I understand that. But when it comes to building good habits and being able to execute on what we've recognized, we like to be able to have good physical habits that reinforce that. So these four points that we call, you see I've got a number, 1 at the shoulder, 2 at the hip, 3 at the knee, and 4 at the ankle. Our basic concept here is that as we get set to deliver the football to a target, we should always have those 4 points. And I ask our kids to imagine that there's 4 laser lights emanating from those 4 points on their body. So if you can imagine kind of three-dimensionally for us now, coaches, as you look at this picture and you see number 1, and I apologize, that's a picture of me. I couldn't hire any professional models to do this. But you see, as you see that each of the numbers on those front points as I get set up in the pocket, those 4 laser points should be shooting straight out at you as you view the screen, as you're the receiver that we prepare to throw to. And the way we'll put our quarterbacks through this kind of drill is we'll ask them to pick 3 or 4 or 5 different points on the field, and we'll tell them, you know, right speed out, right curl, middle post, left curl, left speed out or left swing, and ask our quarterbacks, and by moving their back foot first and then adjusting their front foot, to get their points aligned toward those different places on the field. So that's the 4 points drill. Really helpful one for us. The next one is weight transfer. One of the biggest things that quarterbacks, I think, make a mistake with is after making a great decision, recognizing pre-snap all the things that they should have seen, making decent decisions post-drop and post-snap as they get set to deliver the balls, that they don't get full power. They don't get full velocity on the ball that they throw. And I think a lot of times that comes from a lack of weight transfer. So I've got some pictures here. It doesn't play as well as it does on video, but it gives us a good idea of how we want to get this drill executed. So you'll see all the numbers for these have to do with the sequence. So the 3 pictures across the top with the number 1 mean that this is just 3 different angles pre-snap that we've taken a picture of, okay? And you see that I'm doing this with a volleyball. It can be done with a volleyball, soccer ball, basketball, soccer ball, whatever works. Right now I'm doing it with a volleyball, and I've got my 4 points aligned straight to where I want to deliver the football. And you'll see that I have kind of a staggered stance. I have my left, as a right-handed quarterback, I have my left foot staggered a little bit offset from where the right foot is. And we call that toward the instep. And what that does pre-snap is it allows us to give ourselves a lane. When I step toward my target, I'm not going to step on my own midline. I'm going to step outside in toward my target, and as I get set to deliver. So that's why I start from that stance. And you see that I have the ball and holding my throwing hand under the ball, other hand on top of and just behind the ball. As we move down to picture 2, you can see that I've stepped toward my target, not on that red midline, but just outside the midline. And as I bring everything through, you'll see in pictures, both the pictures labeled number 3, you see a front view and a back view of the way that I finish. And now I don't have that dramatically left behind hip or left behind right foot as a right-handed quarterback. I'm actually bringing it forward to kind of finish, coming pretty close to balanced up as I finish. Those of you who've ever had a shortstop or a third baseman as a quarterback, a lot of times we'll find them that they've lived their whole lives relying on arm strength, and they leave that back hip and that back foot back and don't really follow through as they execute a throw. So this is one of the drills we like to use to encourage them to be as aggressive as they can in transferring their weight. Okay. So for the most part, most of the drills here, I'm going to show one more drill, and I'm going to step kind of quickly as we're 3/4 past the hour now. I want to make sure that I get to everything in a timely manner. Start from the finish. What do I mean by that? It means if I run out on the first or second day of camp and I tell quarterbacks to go through drops, either from the gun or under center, and I tell my receivers to just run their routes, I think a lot of times it can be difficult for us to deliver balls that are thrown with anticipation and with great placement. So one of the ways that we deal with that, particularly in the off season, is something called the route break. And we've got a diagram here, and I'd like for you to kind of, a little bit of imagination we got to use here first. You see the red square, that's our center. The blue circle just behind him is obviously our quarterback. Out here to the right, on the same plane or the same level as that red square, is our number 1 receiver. He's going to run a comeback, and let's say this is a 16 back to 12 or an 18 back to 14 comeback, a deep comeback. I don't want my quarterbacks, either from under center or in the gun, to go through the drop and have my wideouts run through their full route the first time that they experience this together. And so a lot of coaches ask me, why is that? Well, because I'm afraid, and I've seen it time and again, both in a camp environment and in a team environment, that when my quarterbacks are asked to go through a full drop with the pressure of completing a ball, they typically get very sloppy in their just their footwork in their drop. They typically don't get the depth or the efficiency that they should in their drop. So instead, I'll move them back to this second blue circle, this blue circle that's at the bottom of your screen. And I'll ask them to get their 4 points aligned, not straight down the middle of the field as it would be during the drop, but actually out to the break point, to where we expect our receiver to break. So the quarterback is set up already, 6, 7 yards behind the line of scrimmage with his pointer line out here to the right. The receiver, on the other hand, doesn't start from the line of scrimmage. He instead starts a step to 2 steps from his break point at the top of his route. So on the quarterback's go, instead of it being a release from the line of scrimmage and a release from the line of scrimmage back into his drop for the quarterback, these folks are already pretty much aligned where they need to be to execute the tail end of this route. So the quarterback, again, has got the 4-pointer line. He's already in his drop. We have our number one receiver is just a step or 2 shy from the top of his break point, and the quarterback just yells, go. The receiver takes that 1 or 2 steps to his waits for his inside foot to plant in the ground, and then cuts back to the outside, breaking downhill out to the sideline. So the quarterback's visual cue is to, when he sees that inside foot go down into the ground, he's going to pull the trigger on loading the football up and delivering the football. One of the reasons that I think this is really important and a great teaching tool and a good way to establish confidence is that when we put the quarterback, especially, when we put the quarterback at the top of his drop with his pointer line towards where he needs to deliver the football, it gives him some recognition, some peace of mind about where he needs to be aligned on future drops just before the ball is thrown. So when we progress past this and we go to full routes and full drops, the quarterback knows what he's striving for. He knows the goal. He knows how it feels, and so he's going to work to get there, okay? I'm going to move quickly. I'm going to skip over this stuff. You'll have it in the presentation if you ask for it. We'll make sure that we get it to you, some of the drills that are cited there for physical techniques. The next thing I want to talk about is coaching feedback, and this goes beyond, hey, nice job, buddy, or hey, terrible job, what are you doing, what are you thinking? This is the constant reinforcement that we give to our quarterbacks. Scouting reports, big one. Some of the scouting report keys that I care about we'll talk about, and then give a scouting report example. First type of reinforcement we can give our quarterbacks is that scouting report. So 2 things to remember. For me, economy. Sometimes I think as a younger coach, I probably gave too much information. As I've gotten on in years and had a lot of experience with high school athletes and athletes really at all levels, college and youth as well, we have to be economical in the way that we identify what we want to show our quarterbacks and our players in general. Give them the big-ticket items. Give them the stuff that's going to help them, and make sure you keep them wanting more. We want our guys to look forward to our scouting report, not be dreading the 8-page document that's really dense with data. I'll show you an example of some of the scouting reports that I like to use. Some of the things we care about. Make sure we ID one or more glaring weaknesses on the defensive side. Also want to ID anybody who's a difference maker, who's a guy to stay away from or be conscious of where he is at all times. We want to make sure that we identify fronts so that we can match weaknesses, especially if we've got a quarterback that we feel we can check some plays with. Important that we identify fronts in that scouting report, and then also coverage-wise, identify potential weaknesses for what it is that we like to do. Here's an example of an Excel document. I haven't used this in probably about 4 years. This is an example of an older one that I used during one of our better years at Hudson Catholic, where we made sure that we had a good picture of everything that we'd be seeing from that upcoming week. As you can see, this is kind of a color-rich document. Our kids really look forward to getting this. That's a tight view. There's the middle view where we give some basic information about some of the best players, some of the positional weaknesses, and then there's the full view. If you're interested in this, again, please feel free to ask for it. I'll send it to you in Excel, so it's fully editable. You can play with it and do whatever you like with it, but it's still going to be of interest to some of you guys that really like to get into the drawing aspect of presenting a scouting report. It's become a little bit obsolete for me because of the power of Huddle as a tool that we've experienced. Huddle allows us to do a lot of the scouting report stuff a lot easier, and sometimes I find that sometimes drawing in PowerPoint can be a little bit easier as well. What other types of coaching feedback can we have? Well, player grades are a really important one for me. All my quarterbacks get graded every week. If you stepped on the field as a quarterback, you'll get graded week to week. For other positions where we obviously don't, a lot of times if we're constrained with coaching resources, and there's 5 interior linemen, let's say, 6 or 7 if you played multiple guys, who need to get graded every week, that can be a lot of post-game work for your offensive line coach, for example. So at other positions, we typically just do a random selection. No player knows going into a game if he's one of the 1 or 2 guys in a position group that will be graded. We'll announce after the game who's getting graded. So it kind of keeps guys on their toes. But when it comes to quarterbacks, the way that we grade out our quarterbacks is pretty simple. Here's an example of like this. Again, this is an Excel spreadsheet. Let me know if you want it. I'll get it to you fully editable format. You'll see across the top, right under where it says Catholic, you'll see that the 4 areas that we're gray on are physically, did you do what you were supposed to as a quarterback? Next column is hustle. Did you move as hard as you could and as fast as you could to get the job done? Vision. Did you see things pre and post snap the way you should have based on what you've been taught? And then finally, execution. Did the play go well? So we've changed some names here in the QB column to protect the innocent, and we've given our you'll see that we give comments there as well. Now, one of the things that I've done, and this, I won't have time to talk about it tonight, but I've started to use Huddle to actually execute my grading schema in Huddle, and then be able to do a straight extract and dump it down to Microsoft Excel, so that my quarterbacks during film session actually have the grades on paper in front of them, but also see it up on the screen along the header row on the Huddle video that we're watching. So here's a full screen version of it. Again, if you want this document, let me know. Just mention the grading document in Excel, and I'll be happy to get it to you. Okay. What else? How else can we use technology to help us grade our quarterbacks out? Well, there's a few. Huddle, obviously, the cost has dropped so dramatically on technology that we have today that I think especially there's a way that most schools, even schools, I've coached the schools that have money, I've coached the schools where they don't really have a lot of money, and I've found that just about everybody now, usually whether it's through Booster Club or through fundraising, I know some coaches that go in the pocket and they love it so much they pay for it themselves. Huddle's become pretty affordable and has become a great tool. If you have a tool that's an equivalent of Huddle that you like to use, and I say, go for it. And as long as there's something that reduces the overhead. Those of you that have coached as long as I have, and I know there's a lot of you on the phone, you remember the days of burning a lot of DVDs, and then back to when I was a really young coach, I remember coming home on a Monday night from our league coaches meeting or on a Sunday exchange with these big bulky VHS tapes. Things have come a long way, and we got to take advantage of that technology, obviously. One of the things about Huddle that I love is, unlike the old days, our kids, by the time they get back in with us, if we give them a Sunday off, by the time I get back with them on Monday, they've already seen many of the notes that I've already delivered to them in clips if I choose to deliver to them on a Sunday, for example, when they get back in with us. What other technology can we use? Coach's Eye, this is one of the ones that I love, and there's a slew of competitors for Coach's Eye, all on the same level that are really helpful. The reason I like it, especially in the preseason, with quarterbacks, it can help us a lot with mechanical evaluation of what our quarterbacks are doing. It's a $4.99 app, I think, in the App Store if you want to use it. I use it typically with an iPad. I've also used it with an Android phone. So a lot of different ways that you can use it and take advantage of it. If you have questions about any of these technology tools, feel free to email me about them as well. What else can we use? Well, I think anytime we can get more efficient when it comes to using online resources, it's a good one. There's a couple of versions that you're looking at right now. One is Dropbox and one is Locker. A couple of the big differences here. Dropbox is a free solution with a pretty healthy storage amount, especially if you recommend it to friends. They give you a ton of free storage. And what it gives you the freedom to do, if you haven't used something like this, coaches, is access any of your documents, any of your documentation, your files that you need to coach. I remember the old days having to remember to put it on a thumb drive or making sure that I emailed documents to myself so I could open it somewhere else. This saves all that hassle. As long as you got access to a web browser, you can get into Dropbox and go ahead and pull down whatever files and print or distribute whatever you need to do. Locker to the right is a relatively new entry into the coaching marketplace, but we became a test user for them earlier in the winter, and I like what I saw. It is a subscription-based service. It's not very expensive. It's a little bit more of a football-themed version of Dropbox, if you will. A lot of opportunity to put practice schedules in there, to do diagrams and drills, drop in video, those sorts of things. So Locker is a pretty fun and new tool as well. Okay, so what we talk about tonight. First thing we talked about is we want quarterbacks that are comfortable, that can recognize, that can understand, and can therefore attack. We also want to outline a clear teaching strategy. That we approach it with a sequence, making sure that we get our quarterbacks used to the way that we teach from year to year, week to week, whatever it is. We talked about scheduling and organizing the way that we teach, so I hope that was some help. And then finally, what's our end goal is to achieve confidence at the quarterback position. So I want to remind you guys, I didn't do a very good job of introducing myself at the beginning. I am the founder and director of Complete QB. We've been around. This is our 15th season of doing quarterback development camps around the U.S. We're in about a dozen cities around the country. We'd love to have you at our camp anytime you want to come. And I always like to say this, although it's my livelihood and it's what I do, guys, I really do feel that coaching is about sharing the knowledge that you've gained. I know I wouldn't know half of what I know now, and I still got a lot to learn, but I wouldn't know half of what I know if it wasn't for coaches who are kind to me and share with me along the way. So I always leave that door open. There's no cost for a coach to come to our camp. Whether you send quarterbacks to our camp or not, I hope that we can see you. I just asked for the courtesy of an email. Just give me a heads up that you're coming along, or a phone call. Just say, hey, Coach, I'll be there. And if you get caught out there and you find out at the last minute that you're not able to call ahead, still come on out. We'd love to have you. Bring as many of your coaching staff as you want. It's an open door. We're happy to have you on the field with us in the classroom. We do 2 days at every camp. We do 4 on-field sessions and 3 classroom sessions. Every quarterback gets 2 sessions on recognizing and reacting to defenses, as well as a session on physically executing as a quarterback via video review of every camper who comes to our camp. Also, at about half of our camps, our sister camp, Complete Wideout, offers a camp as well. So I'd like you to take my contact information and feel free at any point to reach out to me, either via phone or email. If we want to continue the conversation, and give you my cell number, and feel free to text me, anything like that. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us tonight, Coach. It means a lot, and a lot of fun joining me. So feel free to visit our website at any point as well and learn more about what we do. Scott?
Hey, thanks so much, Coach. That was great. Coaches, in just a little bit, we will open up the floor for questions. You can submit your questions by the questions section of your webinar control panel. That's just like instant messaging or chat. Or if you've dialed in using a telephone tonight, you can click the button that looks like a small hand on the vertical toolbar that's sticking out from your webinar control panel to ask a live question. Coach, we'll give it a couple minutes, and then we'll hop right into the Q&A portion, if that's all right with you.
Sounds good. And
all right, we'll give you a few seconds.
Go ahead.
Give you a few seconds to grab a drink of water or something, and we'll do the Q&A in about 4 minutes.
Sounds great. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Coach.
Coaches, as you listen in too, coaches, feel free to shoot me those emails now if you want to get a copy of the slide deck or any of the documents that I talked about.
All right, Coach, you there?
Yes, Coach.
Coach, I think we'll hop into the questions now, if that's all right with you.
Sounds good.
All right. Coach, the first question comes in that says, Coach, how much time in a day are you spending on some of these QB drills?
That's a great question, and it depends on the time of year. Obviously, we have some flexibility over the summer in the state of New Jersey based on the rules that essentially when your school's summer, school's last spring sport the season is wrapped, you have the ability to do some workouts. Obviously, there's some restrictions around that in terms of equipment and length and frequency and all that, but we have the opportunity to do some of that stuff over the summer a little bit. We also, when it comes to fall camp, when we first open camp, that's the time of year we have the greatest amount of time to do some really intricate drill work and spend a lot of time. There are practices that we'll go as high as 30 or 32 minutes of individual period early on in camp, and then as we get into our season, I have to be a lot more, judicious with the way that I pick. I really got to give some good thought to what drills I want to use, and a lot of times it'll be about what we're facing that week. So my individual period will get as short as like 10 minutes as we get further on into our season. If we have a big opponent coming up, we have to spend a lot of time on scheme and team periods and that sort of thing. So that's heavily dependent on the time of year. One additional point I'll make to that, to the coach who asked it, and anybody who really is interested. I have a drill menu that I use, and that's also in Microsoft Excel, and I have it for all my position coaches, and it's a really helpful, especially during preseason. Has a whole list. I think on the quarterback side, it probably has 32 or 35 drills, and I'll basically check off if that drill is going to be a part of that practice, and then how many minutes we're going to spend on that drill within our overall constraints of our individual period. So if you're interested in that, just ask for the QB, the drill menu.
Thanks, Coach. Coach, the next one says, do you also show your quarterbacks how to read coverages versus a 3-3-5 and 4-2-5 defense?
Sure. We always do that. We always start with, that's a really good question. It's typically when we first start out, there's a couple of reasons that we take the approach that we take. And the first is that we always want to try to identify the most basic coverages, so we can get kind of like that basic coverage literacy down. When we start to get into 3-3 and 4-2-5, the reason that I don't automatically jump into it is that I know that during the course of a year, I know for certain that I'm going to see a 4-4 cover 3. I know that I'm going to see a 3-4 cover 2 or a 4-3 cover 2. So those are the types, and all the man and combo variations that go with it. So that's the reason that I start there. If, however, I was going into a season and knew that I was going to see a lot of 3-3 stack, let's say, or I was going to see, those nickel type looks, so like a 4-2-5, then I would certainly spend some time on it earlier on. I'm always happy to talk offline about, kind of the approach that I take to teaching those. Still some of the same base concepts. Obviously, got to identify the safety, got to make sure that our quarterbacks know what the weaknesses are, and know where their vulnerabilities are in terms of blitz action. But that's the reason that I break it down that way, because what I know based on our schedule, you usually have a pretty good idea based year in, year out on your opponents, what you expect them to play during the year.
Thanks, Coach. We got a comment scattered in between some questions. It says, no questions. Thanks. Everything was very clear and liked this webinar a lot.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks.
And then, Coach, the next question says, Coach, what routes do you throw in your route break drill besides the comeback?
We have a couple basic ones that are really good for us. For us, the curl we care a lot about. The reason we care a lot about the curl is because we want to make sure the placement. When we see mistakes on our curl route, and this can be true for a team that either releases straight off the line of scrimmage or has like a 1 to 3 step stem to the inside as they run their curl. It's important that the placement does not limit our receiver's ability to catch the ball. What do I mean by that? It's a little bit different than an out-breaking route or an in-breaking route, because just something as simple as our elbow dropping a little bit low and causing that ball to sail, and a receiver having to outstretch way over his head to catch the ball, or having to reach dramatically to the inside especially, or even to the outside to catch the ball, that basically rewards the cornerback, say a cover 3 cornerback. It rewards him, even though he wasn't in great position to make a play on the ball, he can now legally get to the ball potentially and disrupt. Whereas if we place the ball in the right spot, we always say, the top of the chest is where we want to put that curl ball. Put it just below the man's face mask. That is a tough ball for a corner who gave some ground, say in cover 3, for example, to react up and be able to take away or knock down the football. We also like any of our we like to be able to do it for some of our shorter routes. We like to do it for speed outs. Just get a guy positioned so that he gets comfortable with how his feet should be. Those shorter routes, both the speed out and the slant, tend to have some of the worst footwork that I ever see in quarterback play. And it's a simple reason why, I think, and that is because so many of us as coaches are so anxious to get the ball out that sometimes all we emphasize is get the ball out, get it out in a hurry, get it out quickly. And then what you wind up with is a quarterback who maybe is leaving behind some of his good sound mechanics, and in the interest of maybe picking up a tenth or 2/10 of a second in getting the ball out, doesn't have his points position and really sacrifices some accuracy. So I like to have our guys, even on our short routes like slants and shoots or speed outs, also do the route break as a starter.
Thanks, Coach. Coach, the next one says, Coach, any tricks you can provide about coaching QBs who will work primarily under center, since that's no longer in vogue?
Sure. I think this is going to sound like a funny one. The very first thing I like to do is make sure that I have kids that have some, decent stability, agility, and balance. While it's important for our shotgun quarterbacks, certainly guys that are in the pistol or in the gun, I always find that jumping rope is just, how long has it been around? Over 100 years probably, right? You see footage of boxers from the old black and white silent film era who would jump and rope back then. There really is a benefit to a quarterback that can live on the balls of his feet. And I find that guys who are under center, a little bit more often than guys in the gun, have a tendency, when they settle in under center, to do a couple negative things as a quarterback. And the first is that they allow their weight to rock back onto their heels. And what that does for us, that 99 times out of 100 is going to make us stiff through our ankles, through our knees, and through our hips. And it's also going to cause us to engage our hips so little that we tend to almost round our back a little bit. Then it's like kind of on through the kinetic chain, I guess. We see our quarterback's eyes fall, so they're looking at the back of the center. Just in general, visually, physically, explosively, quarterbacks is in a bad position to play. So the very first thing I like to do is to try to get our quarterbacks, the guys who are under center, to live on the balls of their feet. And that doesn't mean up on their tippy toes. It just means that as they're under center, that you just have the ability to slide just a finger under their heel between the bottom of their spikes or their cleats and the ground. So that's probably the number one thing that I'd say there. And then for guys that are going to be in any kind of a traditional drop back pass game from under center, really important that you use something we call something called the rhythm of the drop. And essentially, I'll do my best to recreate it on the phone for you. But rather than just tell our quarterbacks that they have a 5-step drop, we like to drill them very early. This is something you can even do in the gym, months and months before you get started. Just, give them as kind of an assignment, tell them they can work on it on their own, is to assign a tempo and a rhythm and a placement for every step. So if it's a 5-step drop, for example, I don't put an emphasis on speed. I put an emphasis on consistency and efficiency. And then as a quarterback gets a little quicker at it, whether he's been jumping rope or going through his drops, he gets better at it. But essentially what we'll do is ask our quarterback before he makes his drop to tap out his rhythm of the drop. So for us, it'll sound something like this. So I'll give you an example of what I think my rhythm probably is on the drop. The tempo of my steps on a 5-step drop probably sound like this. That 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 is probably the tempo of my 5-step drop, and that's going to get me, I'm about 5'10", that's going to get me to about 6.5 yards probably on my drop. You're going to find quarterbacks that are slower than that to start, quarterbacks that are faster than that to start, but it does get them mindful of being efficient and having a tempo to the way that they drop. The last tip that I'll give to guys who are under center quarterbacks is that we take great angles on play action, and I use cones to do that, and on straight sprint out or roll out passing or even half rolls, making sure that we get sufficient depth from the line of scrimmage, not only depth from the line of scrimmage, but then turn the corner to start to get headed downhill when we execute our throws. Those are really important, I think, a really important point we don't want to overlook for our quarterbacks under center.
Great, thanks, Coach. Coach, the next one says, Coach, throwing mechanics are a problem. Do you have some drills for fades?
For fade, sure. I think the number one thing that we see on a fade ball that's usually problematic is and this is, even for guys that you want to have throw a back shoulder fade, you don't want to have them throw a dead ball. So the number one issue that we find with fades are that as the ball goes downfield, the downfield nose of the football is up in the air, and that's the way it starts, and that's the way it should start. But then as it reaches its apex and it starts to descend down toward the receiver, the football stays in that position with the nose up and the back of the football down. And that's wind resistance. There's less revolutions on the ball. That's not a ball that we have a lot of command over when we release it. So there's a couple things that we like to do to try to make sure that we maximize our revolutions on the ball. And the number one rule we always try to tell our quarterbacks is we don't want to tilt the shelf of our shoulders dramatically. A lot of times you'll see quarterbacks, a couple of the crutches that people will use is they'll tilt for a right-handed quarterback, they'll tilt this right shoulder way back and try to simulate or to achieve getting under the ball. The other thing that they'll do is they'll drop their elbow low. So really all that they're doing when that's the approach is they're pushing the ball up to that point of its apex. And that's the reason that it climbs with the nose up. But then once it reaches that peak point in the air, the reason that it falls and it's kind of that dead fish as it comes down with, again, the upfield nose in the air and the backfield nose down. So the way that we try to remedy it, instead of tilting our shoulders or dropping our elbow, is we always ask our quarterbacks, as they load up on that back foot, as they get set to deliver the football, to get kind of a visual impression of their weight being, so for a right-handed quarterback, try to visualize this with me, coaches, that we get our weight concentrated to the inside of the back foot, on the ball and the big toe of that back foot. And as we release the football, we try to, I call it a corkscrew. We want to even a little bit more dramatically. Instead of just having our shoulder point and our forepoint at our target, I ask our quarterbacks almost to over-rotate a little bit. It's going to allow us to get more explosion in our lumbar spine and our core, and then that explosiveness that we're getting by putting our pressure to the inside of our back foot as we come forward, we're far more likely to follow through to a position of balance with that back leg and that back hip. And what's the effect that has on the throw? Well, we get more revolutions on the ball. So as it reaches its apex or its top point just before it descends down toward the receiver, we're a lot more likely to have that nose come down the way we want it with more control over the ball. And that goes for a fade that we're trying to throw to a receiver that's running away, as well as a receiver that's like a back corner of the end zone or a back shoulder fade type concept.